The political crisis that unfolded in the UK Parliament was nothing short of unprecedented. What we witnessed that fateful Wednesday afternoon in the House of Commons will forever be remembered as a turning point in modern British politics. This was not simply a routine session of Prime Minister's questions, PMQs, where the usual back and forth exchanges occur. This was the moment a Prime Minister was publicly exposed for his involvement in a scandal that would come to define his leadership and the future of the Labour Party. The attack was swift and precise, delivered by none other than Nigel Farage. Farage, leader of Reform UK, had long been a thorn in the side of the political establishment. But what transpired during PMQs on that day took his political influence to an entirely new level. This wasn't a rhetorical flourish or an emotional outburst designed to score political points. Farage had prepared for this day. He knew the key allegations. He had the evidence. And most importantly, he understood the stakes. In less than 3 minutes, he unleashed a devastating series of accusations that shook the very foundations of Labour's green agenda. With a calm, measured tone, he didn't raise his voice to try to be heard. Instead, Farage's delivery was cold, forensic, and utterly lethal. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't grandstanding. He was simply laying bare the shocking truth in a way that no one could ignore. His words were meticulously chosen. This government claims to save the planet. Yet in reality, you are simply enriching your friends. It was the opening salvo in a series of bombshell revelations that would leave Prime Minister Keir Starmer scrambling for a response. The room went silent. The accusation hung in the air like a thick fog. The implication was clear. Labour wasn't pushing forward an environmentally conscious agenda for the good of the people but for the benefit of a small group of wealthy donors with ties to the very policies they were pushing. Farage dropped the first bombshell. £5 million from ERUPTS boss into Labour coffers. And just 72 hours later you rigged the wind farm laws to double his fortune. The words echoed across the chamber. Labour's backbench began looking at each other nervously. The Prime Minister's face drained of colour. This was no longer a political debate. This was a corruption investigation, unfolding in real time. And Farage was methodically dismantling the government's credibility. Starmer, for his part, tried to play the role of the indignant leader. His response was typical of a man caught off guard, a leader who was not prepared for the scale of the attack he was facing. As Farage pressed on, delivering one damning piece of evidence after another, Starmer's deflections grew louder and more frantic. Farage had more in his arsenal. You have handed £22 billion of taxpayer money to oil lobbyists for unproven carbon capture schemes, he continued, exposing the scandal that many had suspected, but few had dared to articulate so boldly. While your energy secretary's own advisors are on the payroll of hedge funds like Quadria, who is actually running this country? Is it the voters or the donors buying your laws? The chamber went deathly silent again. It was a moment of profound political clarity. Farage was no longer just accusing the Prime Minister of financial mismanagement or policy failure. He was accusing him of corruption, of selling out the British people to the highest bidder. At this point, Starmer's deflections were no longer effective. His mask of confidence slipped. The usual veneer of calm and control that had served him so well in the past was gone. In its place there was a palpable sense of panic. His response was a reflexive outburst, one designed not to address the allegations, but to shift the conversation to something else. How dare you question the integrity of this front bench when all you offer is conspiracy and denial? Starmer shouted, his voice rising to a pitch of frustration. It was as if he was attempting to distract the chamber from the real issues at hand. But the damage had already been done. The room was not buying it. Senior MPs, the veterans of countless parliamentary skirmishes, looked on in shock. They had seen political scandals before, but this was different. This was not the response of a man with the moral high ground. This was the reaction of a man caught in a lie, trying desperately to claw his way out of a political trap he had no hope of escaping. Farage's response was cold and cutting. He didn't rise to Starmer's emotional outbursts. Instead, he pressed the advantage, hammering home the devastating facts. You have handed billions in subsidies to oil giants like BP under the guise of green energy policies, he declared. And you're doing all of this while slashing winter fuel payments for pensioners. The hypocrisy is staggering. The chamber was now fully on edge. Farage had hit where it hurt. He had exposed the very contradictions at the heart of Labour's green agenda. Policies that were meant to help the environment but were instead enriching the political elite. As the Prime Minister's shouting grew louder, Farage stood his ground. He wasn't interested in theatrics. He was interested in the truth. The Prime Minister, meanwhile, was visibly losing control, his face growing purple with rage. He lunged forward, shouting about a climate emergency, desperately trying to shift the narrative away from the bribery allegations. But no matter how loud he screamed, it didn't change the fact that he was being exposed as complicit in a massive financial scandal. In that moment, Farage made it clear. This wasn't just political theater. It was a full-blown scandal. And the Prime Minister had no answers. The Speaker of the House intervened, calling for order. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Starmer's attempt to deflect the allegations and rally support was falling apart. He had nowhere to hide. Farage had delivered the final blow, and the rest of the chamber watched as the Prime Minister was left speechless and vulnerable. The Speaker called time on the session, signaling the end of the allotted time for PMQs. Starmer, his hands shaking, grabbed his binder and made a hasty retreat. His face was a picture of panic, and he didn't even glance at the opposition benches where Farage stood victorious. The contrast could not have been starker. While Starmer fled the scene, Farage stood tall, his resolve unshaken, knowing that the truth had been exposed for all to see. Farage didn't stop there. Outside the Commons, the media was waiting for Starr, eager to hear his side of the story. As the Prime Minister made his way to his armored car, reporters crowded around shouting questions about the cash for policy scandal that had just been aired in Parliament. Farage, ever the opportunist, was ready to make his point. Watch him run, he said to the cameras, his voice dripping with contempt. He is fleeing because he cannot justify handing £5 million of influence to electricity donors in exchange for rigging the planning laws to boost their profits. It was the statement that would come to define the moment. Starmer, in his attempt to evade the press, raised his hand to his ear as though he couldn't hear the barrage of questions coming his way. It was a pathetic attempt at deflection. As reporters pressed him, Starmer ignored them, eyes fixed on the pavement, practically diving into his car to escape the media spotlight. The Prime Minister's cowardice was on full display for the world to see. He had nothing left to say, and he knew it. But Farage was relentless. Outside Westminster, the Reform UK leader addressed the media, confidently laying out the facts. What we witnessed today, he said, was not just a politician dodging a question. It was the behavior of a guilty man fleeing the scene of a financial crime. Farage's words rang out, echoing across the nation. The public was beginning to wake up to the full extent of the scandal. Farage wasn't just making allegations. He was exposing the truth. And the truth was damning. The British public, long accustomed to political scandals, were now confronted with a level of corruption that went beyond anything they had ever imagined. The implications of Farage's revelations were enormous. The entire Green agenda was called into question. The £5 million donation from Electricity's CEO to Labour's coffers, followed by the rigging of wind farm laws, was just the tip of the iceberg. Farage also laid bare the £22 billion carbon capture deal which had been handed to oil giants like BP under the false pretense of green energy investment. While pensioners were struggling to pay their heating bills, Labour's donors were laughing all the way to the bank. As the scandal spread, Farage's message gained momentum. The public was outraged. Farage's video, which had already accumulated millions of views, became a rallying cry for those who felt betrayed by the government. Meanwhile, Labour's support began to crumble. Within days, polling numbers for Starr's party dropped to historic lows. The once unassailable political machine that had been Labour was now in freefall, bleeding support in every industrial town across the UK. Meanwhile, Reform UK's numbers surged, with Farage emerging as the true voice of the working class. His message resonated with voters who had felt abandoned by both the Tories and Labour. The Green agenda, once framed as an essential part of the fight against climate change, had been exposed for what it truly was, a vehicle for political elites to enrich themselves at the expense of ordinary Britons. In the aftermath, the political landscape shifted dramatically. Farage's relentless pursuit of the truth had not only exposed Labour's corruption, but also set the stage for a new era in British politics. The establishment, both in Westminster and beyond, was on the defensive. For the first time in years, the political elite was facing a real challenge to their power. Farage, meanwhile, had become a hero for many. A man who had dared to stand up to the establishment and expose their lies. His message was simple. It was time for a new kind of politics, one that put the interests of the people first, not the interests of the elite. As the scandal unfolded, the truth about the government's green agenda became clear. The energy policies that were supposed to benefit the British public were in reality enriching a small group of wealthy donors and corporations. The public was fed up. They were tired of being lied to, tired of seeing their hard-earned money go to waste, tired of watching their lives being disrupted by policies that served no one but the powerful. Farage's attack on Starmer and Labour was just the beginning. The fight for the soul of British politics had only just begun, and Farage had positioned himself at the forefront of that battle.